Thanks for joining. Good morning. I'll go ahead and get started since it's time. My name is Andrea Fabillaron, and I am one of the college program coordinators at California Youth Advocacy Network, or CYAN. And today's presentation, I'll be going over products, prevalence, and perceptions, findings from CYAN's college focus groups. So most of you, if not all of you, have already heard a little bit about our organization. So I'll make this brief for those who may not have heard or maybe want to know a little bit more. So we are a statewide training and technical assistance provider. We work with all of you on a local level to engage youth and young adults to do tobacco control advocacy. And we do this with our youth and college programs. We also want to stay up to date with emerging products. There's a ton of products that are constantly on the market. So we want to make sure that we're learning about those products so we can educate young people, adult partners, and communities about the emerging products, as well as best support quit attempts. So for today's presentation, we'll be going over CYN focus groups. What do they look like? Why do we do these focus groups? And kind of paint a picture of how we interact with young people during these groups. Then we'll go over findings from our March 2020 focus groups, things that we learned about the products young people are using, perceptions about these products, and also quit messaging and resources that young people would use. And then since these focus groups were conducted literally right before COVID was kind of at an all-time high, right before shelter in place and campus closures, a lot has happened since then. So I'll also share with you all what we know about COVID-19 and tobacco use. And then we will have time at the end for any questions. So feel free to drop questions in the chat, or you can save them till the end. My colleagues, Caitlin Maisman and Vicki Webster, are also on the presentation, so they can support with any tech issues, but we'll answer any questions pertaining to the presentation at the end. So why does CYN do these focus groups? Some past and current challenges that we continue to face include an increase in use of non-cigarette tobacco products. So we're seeing this with e-cigarettes, THC and nicotine vaping, also heat not burn products, smokeless tobacco, just to name a few. So we want to know what products young people are using, because typically when we find out about these products, it's likely that young people are already using it or already know about these products. And we also know that there are a lot of misperceptions and lack of information from various audiences. So we want to know what that misinformation is so we can create resources, trainings, or materials to address those misperceptions and provide correct information. Lastly, we want to know what young people are calling these products. There's a lot of names for the different products. Terminology is constantly changing, so we also want to make sure that we're up to date with what young people recognize and how they identify these products. So CYN started conducting focus groups in 2013, and we've conducted focus groups throughout the state of California over the years. Typically, our waves of focus groups are in the spring and in the fall, with our most recent 2 waves of focus groups in fall 2019 and spring of 2020. Our focus groups are with youth between 11 to 18 years old and with young adults between 18 and 29 years old. I do like to point out that when we do our college focus groups, we recognize that some students are non-traditional students, so we might have older adults participate in the groups who are outside of that 18 to 29 age range. We work really closely with our community and campus partners to recruit young people for these groups, so we can create registration and flyers like you can see on this slide, but we really work and rely on our partners to make sure that we actually have young people to talk to. Some of the products that we discussed during our most recent focus group include the various vaping devices, hookah, smokeless tobacco, and marijuana. So we created this interview guide to help us facilitate the focus groups, but our intention of these groups is to really create a space for informal discussion. We ask a lot of open-ended questions or show pictures so students can engage in open dialogue. Sometimes, if possible, the adult coordinator or staff won't be present in the room to really reinforce that idea that these focus groups are anonymous, and we want to learn what is actually true for young people and their experiences and their observations, and not what they think we want them to know and what we think is true for them. So we use this as a means to facilitate the groups, but we also kind of gauge the flow of discussion as well. So it's not, this is not the structure, we don't follow the structure to a T. So some of the topics include products. We want to know, again, what the terminology they're using, what products they are using, and we talk about flavors since that's really popular among young people and where they're being used. We also want to know quit messaging. What messages will actually encourage young people to quit or get their attention and kind of get them to start thinking about that quitting process. We also talk about cessation and tobacco treatment. What would motivate a young person to quit? Would they go to trusted adults for support in quitting, and what types of resources they would use? We also talked about information processing, so we can find out how they're getting new information and what are trusted sources. And you'd be very surprised to kind of hear where young people are getting their information and what they trust and don't trust. And then lastly, CYN creates a ton of materials, digital resources, printed educational materials. So we want to know that the resources we are creating are actually useful for young people. So we constantly do reviews over our materials because we want to make sure that the materials that we're making are actually impactful for the populations that we're making them for. So in each focus group, each individual receives a demographic form, and it includes questions on age, self-identification for race, social orientation, and gender identity. We also ask questions about tobacco, nicotine vaping, and marijuana use. And more recently, we've added questions on THC vaping to make that distinction between that and other marijuana products. And then we also ask each individual about their harm perception when comparing these products to combustible cigarettes. So our spring 2020 focus groups, like I mentioned, were conducted in March of last year when not social gathering, but when gathering with people in a classroom were actually a thing, and you're allowed to have more than 10 people in a group. So fortunately, we were able to conduct 7 focus groups with college students between 18 to 48 years old. In total, we had 60 participants, and we conducted these groups in Orange and Los Angeles counties. These focus groups, we wanted to focus on product identification, knowledge, and perceptions of these products, as well as treatment and cessation messaging and information processing. So when you take a look at the age of the participants, a majority of them fell in the 18 to 24 age range. We had a handful of older young adults participate, as well as some participants who were over 30 years and older. On the right, you can see there was a pretty diverse group of participants, with more than half self-identifying as Hispanic Latinx, 13% identifying as Asian American, Alaska Native, Pacific Islander, 12% reporting other or multiple race and ethnicities, 8% identifying as white, 7% Middle Eastern, 1% African American or Black, and 1% American Tribal Nation. So taking a look at use for tobacco, nicotine vaping, marijuana, and THC vaping, on the left, you can see a majority of participants actually reported that they had never used these products. With the exception of marijuana products, there were a little more participants who reported any use for marijuana. And then many participants did report any use, however, it was not within the past 30 days. And then a lower percentage in the middle of participants reported use within the past 30 days. So with the perception that a majority of college students are using these products regularly, this information can tell us, kind of reinforces that notion that perceived use is actually higher than actual use. And we can also make a connection between regular use and experimentation as well. So what did we find out during these focus groups? Participants were shown pictures of various products, and we asked open-ended questions like, what is this? What do you call this? Do you recognize this product? Who uses this? Are they more, less, or just as harmful as cigarettes? So starting off, we showed them a picture of a pen, and all were familiar with and able to identify this product, citing other names such as vape, wax pen, and dab pen. Brands like Stizzy and Brass Knuckles came up a lot during these groups. Use was reported among youth peers and older adults, and participants could see use both on campus and off campus as well. Nicotine and THC were associated with pens, while although THC was primarily used among their peer groups. Flavors were talked in great length about this. A lot of people were noting that product flavors were very popular when using pens. In terms of harm perception, participants felt like pens were either just as harmful as cigarettes or even safer. One thing that was very interesting to hear from across all of the 7 focus groups was that harm was actually associated with the frequency of use and where the product was obtained. So in the short term, many felt like if the product was used excessively, then it could increase harm. But in the long term, for people who use it in the long run, it was actually less harmful when compared to cigarettes. We also brought up the vaping lung illness, or EVALI, and a majority of them were familiar with it. However, they attributed the illness to underground or unregulated THC pens. So again, if you obtained it from a shop or a dispensary, that was considered safe. But if you got it on the black market or illegally, then that was considered dangerous. When shown a mod, a majority of participants could identify this product, calling it various names such as a vape, an atomizer, some called it the inhaler or a box vape. And this was also reported across, use was also reported across different age groups, although it was noted that it was not as common among young adults. Many noted that there was a shift towards smaller devices. The mod was seen as very expensive, so young people wanted to buy cheaper products. And also because of the large clouds associated with mods, it was just too obvious. So they wanted something more discreet. So campus use on campus was very rare. In terms of perception, it was generally high among most of the, when compared to most of the products in the focus group, because they attributed the large vape to high amounts of nicotine. Also, because of the reputation that mods can explode in your pocket or your hand, people thought anything that could explode was just dangerous in general. When shown the Juul, this was also recognized across all of the focus groups, also reported use across all age groups. One thing that was very interesting to hear was while use had a social component to it, many noted that their peers or their friends were actually using this as a cessation tool. So many felt like Juul wasn't as strong compared to some of the newer vapes, so they felt like they could use it to quit nicotine without getting addicted. There was also a stress on initiation for young people, so many people weren't using cigarettes before, but this was the first tobacco or nicotine product that they were using. Again, flavors are very popular with Juul. Many even said that they only use Juul because of the products, and dual use with other tobacco and marijuana products were reported by participants. In terms of perception, this was also perceived to be just as harmful or even safer than combustible cigarettes and some other vapes. Just like pens, harm was tied to increased use, where people noted that the product itself might not be addictive, but the habit can be. When we had asked participants about what they knew about Juul or what they had seen in the media regarding Juul, some of them did hear about the lawsuit against Juul and linked it to EVALI, but they weren't really familiar with youth targeting and other controversies in the news. The next product that we showed was a Swarin, which only a handful of participants could identify using other names such as drop. This was likely not used by college students. A lot of people did not recognize use among their peers, so they attributed use to middle to high school age youth or older people. Some people did observe use, but it was every now and then. The interesting thing with this Warren is even though a lot of people weren't really familiar with it, the harm perception was very high, with some people noting that this is probably the harshest product and that it was worse than Juul. And then on to puff bars, which was also immediately identified. Everyone recognized this across all of the focus groups. This was very popular across all age groups. Flavors were also discussed in great length. People were talking about how they have access to different kinds of flavors that really appeal to young people. Daily and occasional use was also noted, and we also learned that there was a strong presence on social media regarding puff bars. So particularly on TikTok, there were a bunch of videos and different challenges that people were doing with puff bars, which was really interesting to hear. And because people can use puff bars and then just throw them away when they're done, we heard from a lot of students that there was a lot of waste on campus, with one participant actually sharing an experience about being a janitor on campus and seeing puff bars both in the trash receptacles and all over campus. In terms of harm perception, this was the only product that was identified as being dangerous because of its flavors. Participants noted that that young people were susceptible to getting addicted to this because flavors made it taste good, and also because of the cute aesthetic of the packaging and the product itself. There was knowledge about the stronger amounts of nicotine in puff bars, so people noted that the risk adds up and that moderate use was not realistic. In reality, a young person wouldn't take a hit, put away their puff bar for a few months, and then take it out again for a hit. So it was likely that people were using this more occasionally, if not regularly. We also showed a picture of a hookah, which all participants were familiar with, although they reported that use was very low with their peer groups. This was a product that they only saw at parties, or if they passed by a hookah lounge, or if they were watching a movie. They also associated hookah with cultural use in older adults, and recognized that this was probably being used with flavors. Overall perception for this was low. Harm perception was low. They felt like it was more dangerous compared to combustible products, but because people were not using it frequently, it posed less of a long-term health impact. And they also thought that the purity of the tobacco that was being used was a little bit more pure, so that was also a lower risk for harm. Lastly, we showed a picture of Zyn, which are nicotine pouches that are marketed as tobacco-free. There was some mixed knowledge about this product. Some people called it smokeless tobacco. Some noted that it looked like gum. So use was seen really with older adults and athletes, not really among the college students that we were talking with, although some did recognize seeing it in stores and in advertisements. Harm perception for Zyn was generally high. They linked it to gum disease, and as one student had said, nasty mouth stuff. So the topic of marijuana came up, especially because there is a little bit of an overlap, like with pens, for example, with nicotine and marijuana. So there was a strong familiarity across all the groups with marijuana and THC products, with vaping THC being the most common mode of consumption for young adults. And they noted that this was very popular on campus. Other ways of consumption included bongs, joints, pens, and edibles, with students noting that they felt like edibles were the safest because they were eating the marijuana versus smoking it. Participants noted that different devices were being used, and there were a mix of marijuana and THC products that everyone was using, with stress relief and medical benefits being attributed as reasons that young people were using these products. And when we talk about harm perception, participants felt like marijuana was not addictive. They thought that it was safe, and when you compare it to vaping nicotine, they felt like marijuana was a lot safer. They couldn't associate any negative impacts with marijuana, and they really only associated danger with illicit or black market products. So if it was obtained illegally, then it was dangerous, but if you got it from a dispensary or a shop, then it was safe and it was more pure. So this is some of the devices that we've known about in the past and that have came up in our focus groups, although one thing that was really interesting was across all 7 focus groups, we were hearing about this new product that we were at the time not aware of. So we actually came out of these focus groups learning about a new product, which was the plug and play. If you look at it, it kind of gives you Juul vibes, right? So the concept about this is it's a rechargeable USB vape with flavored THC pods, and the plug is the charge and the recharging of the vape. And then because of its long-lasting battery, you get over 350 plus puffs per charge. So that's kind of the play component for the plug and play. And as you can see, the marketing is very bright. It includes young people's very popular flavors like Girl Scout cookies, use friendly language like vibe check. That's what we've seen is really popular with young people. And it also plays on the very bright colors with marketing and using catchy phrases like pumped on purple or righteously red and let the sun shine in. So this is something that we've had on our radar since the focus group, just because it's something that we didn't know at the time. And almost actually all of the focus groups, we heard about this product. So this is something that we've just been keeping an eye out for. When we talk about messaging and messages that young people would actually listen to or would appeal to them if they were interested in quitting, young people felt like they weren't addicted, so they believed that they could stop whenever. And when they thought of addiction, they thought of older people who were smoking. So they felt like a more nuanced approach to addiction and awareness would be more helpful and would kind of be more appealing. So really bringing attention to what addiction symptoms actually look like, especially for young people. So anxiety, headaches, trouble concentrating in classes would get them to listen more, kind of get them to think about quitting more. The role model messaging was actually the most popular and most favored across all of the focus groups. They felt like if we portrayed a sibling dynamic or leverage generations of addiction or loss of a family member, that would be more impactful to get them to start, to motivate them in quitting. Quit stories were also a favored message. People felt like it could be relatable to show people who were their age and who looked like them. One thing that to note with real quit stories though is they suggested showing relapses, and that would avoid setting up a false expectation that people are supposed to get it right and perfect on the first try. And they felt like showing the whole quit journey would be would not discourage people from continuing quitting if they accidentally relapsed. And then other topics like health impacts, social justice framing, and cost, there were mixed responses. People felt like they knew young people know about these issues. So if they use these products, they don't really care about messaging around those topics. When it came to quit resources and quit support, young people said that they were not likely to call a helpline or a counselor. However, they would consider texting because they liked the fact that you could text someone anonymously. So apps were also favorable. They said that they liked the idea of tracking your progress and sharing data with friends and peers. So apps were something that they would consider. They also noted that on-campus health centers have some good resources. One suggestion was to start the conversation of addiction and quitting early. So starting with orientation workshops or having workshops throughout the year, noting that a lot of these young people who were targeted in high school are going to be incoming freshmen throughout the years. When we talk about information processing, we actually showed both of the groups vaping myths and reality card, and also a vaping facts card to see which one that they would prefer, which one would get their attention to want to read more. So the myths and realities card actually was preferred by a majority of students. They liked that it challenged any misinformation or misperceptions that they saw in the media, and they felt like a myths and realities card would actually appeal to a younger crowd. Those who did like just a facts only did like that it was direct, that it didn't sugarcoat any information, and it was straight to the point, although they noted that maybe facts only are something that older people would prefer. So in summary, these focus groups told us that THC pens and flavored puff bars were the most popular among college students. we were hearing that Juul was viewed as a cessation device, something that could help people quit nicotine. We learned that many felt like risk was just directly associated with the frequency of the product. So the product itself wasn't dangerous, but the more someone used it, then the higher risk that they would get for negative health impacts. There was also a strong distinction between safe and illicit or black market products for both tobacco and marijuana. And again, flavors are very pervasive across most of the products. That was highly favorable for young people. There was some harm associated with vaping flavors, and there was also dual usage of both marijuana and tobacco that was very common across all of the groups. We also heard that multiple types of tobacco and THC devices were being used simultaneously. So what's next? As I mentioned, we had done these focus groups literally right before campus closures and shelter in place. And so a lot has changed. It's almost been a year since then. So living situations have changed. People aren't able to see their friends as often. Stress, boredom, and anxiety are things to consider. And they're also just the need to care for mental health and general well-being. So this is what we know about tobacco use for young people during COVID-19. So for youth and young adult experimenters, we've heard that rates may be decreasing due to decreased peer interaction. Sometimes if you without that social component, people aren't really using, or they don't really feel the need to experiment, so they may use less. And with that also comes less access to products. Some of these experimenters don't actually own products. They only use products if they're handed to them by their friends or their peers, so less access, or they don't feel the need to go out and buy them. There's also that increased parent exposure. A lot of students, because of distance learning, have moved back home to live with their parents. They don't live in their college towns anymore, so there's more exposure if they were to use tobacco or marijuana in the house. On the flip side, with regular users, we're seeing that rates may be increasing, and this could be due to boredom, because of fewer social interactions, and because of isolation, they have nothing else to do, so they choose to vape or use these products. Stress is also a factor for increasing rates, and then also because of increased use that can accelerate their addiction, which creates this cycle of using more and then getting addicted and then using more because you're addicted. So that's what we know, and we're still working to find out more. So CYN actually created a youth and young adult tobacco use survey. We have questions in there to assess tobacco and nicotine, as well as marijuana use during the pandemic. We want to know what products young people are using during this time, and also what the impact that COVID-19 has had on youth. Have people started using because of COVID? Have people, or because of the pandemic, have people increased or decreased their use during the pandemic? Has the pandemic caused them to quit? So those are things that we want to learn from young people. We also want to know what are motivators for quitting during this time, and also what resources they would use, since there's a mixture of on-campus learning but mostly virtual learning. So what resources would they actually use in their campus and in their community to help with quitting? And just plugging it in there, the survey is open for youth and young adults over the age of 14. So everyone is free and welcome to share this. This survey does close on February 21st. So now we have time for questions. My contact information is here, and I forgot to mention in the beginning of the presentation that we will be sharing the recording and the slides as well. So if you aren't able to take notes on everything, we will be sending all of that out to all participants. So I will open the floor for any questions that people may have. I do see some questions in the chat, which is about the slides and presentation. So yeah, so is the survey for ages 15 and above? It's actually 14 and above. My apologies, I think I might have used the wording incorrectly. And if for anyone who's interested, I can also share the survey link for easy sharing. We've sent a few emails as well. So if you're interested in receiving any promotional materials or the links for the survey, you can also shoot me an email. I'll also include it in the slides when we send them out as well. And if you don't want to drop a question in the chat box, feel free to also, you can unmute yourself and talk. We can have a facilitated discussion. It can be, or we can have an informal discussion. It doesn't have to be this formal Q&A. You're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions without having to type it in. Thank you. Yes, we put a lot of work into these focus groups, and we're constantly changing the methods that we're using and the questions that we're asking. We want them to be relevant. What was important back in 2013 isn't as important now. So, or, things can change, and the shift in products also, we want to make sure that we're keeping up. So while we're finding out new information, we also want to make sure that the questions that we're using to facilitate the discussion is also relevant to ask. I will actually share the survey link in the chat box for you all, so just give me a Okay, so question in the chat box. What are some of the barriers that you have faced while working with youth groups, and how have you overcome them? So one thing that we found is, I think especially now during COVID, with everything being virtual and Zoom fatigue being real, and people just receiving a ton of emails, from school, from outside organizations they might be affiliated with. I think especially during COVID, just letting them know that we're still here to support them, and that tobacco use is still something that should still very much be a topic of conversation among youth and young adults. And so one thing that we really do is we leverage our connections with our youth and young adult partners. We actually have a youth board of students of high school students who across the state, along with college students across the state. So we're always partnering with them, getting their feedback about best ways to create resources and to kind of get this messaging out to young people. One thing that we've also really upped our game with in the last year is social media. And Caitlin Maisman, who is on this presentation, will actually be presenting more about how we've used social media and kind of the messages that we've crafted. We find that, especially because of email and Zoom fatigue, it's one of the easiest ways to get a message out there to encourage and support young people in quitting is to use social media. It's just like a quick interaction that they can scroll through, and if they're interested, we link them to our website. And so I'll actually put in the chat box our Quit Tobacco page on our organization website. We also created this during the pandemic as a means to provide resources that young people would actually use. So again, those free texting programs, free apps. We've also included information about the helpline in there as well. We created a digital quit kit for people who are interested in quitting, but would prefer either free or low cost resources, or kind of want to just take small steps to quit during the pandemic. So we included prompts such as journaling, things that they can use around the house to assist in quitting. One other thing that we also provide throughout the year, not just during events like Great American Smokeout, is we provide campuses with free quit kits. So if you're working with a campus or university, at this time we're only offering it to campus and college and universities, but we do provide free quit kits that people can distribute to any youth or young adults that they're working with. You're welcome. Any other questions? Feel free to drop it on the chat. If you, or you can unmute yourself. Oh, good question. What is in the quit kit? So this year we have sunflower seeds, honey sticks, lollipops, gum. We also have a guide to quitting tobacco. So it's kind of like the physical version of the Quit Tobacco page. It has all the same resources on there. We also include a pen and paper for journaling as well. So those are all, again, those are all free. We can send them throughout the year, not just during big events. So if you're interested, you can email me and I can get that set up to send to you if you're interested. One thing to note about the quit kits too, my apologies, is we encourage people to also customize the quit kits. They don't come pre-assembled. We just provide you with the materials. So you're more than welcome to customize the quit kits and add materials or take out materials, whatever fits best with the population that you're working with. So an example is colleges might include some campus information if they're still offering campus resources, or maybe you might want to put in community resources in there as well for those who don't have access to the on-campus health center. Great. So it looks like people don't have any questions. So I'll give you all a few extra minutes for your break. So just a reminder for you all, you don't have to hop into the general session. Make sure that you go to the agenda to click on the link for the next breakout session, which will start at 10:55. So you do not have to reconvene in the large group. You can go ahead and click on the next breakout session and they'll let you in at 10:55. I will stay on this call until 10:50 to answer any questions people might want to ask offline outside of the presentation, but you're more than welcome to take a few extra minutes on your break and then go into the next breakout.